My name is Brian Gardner, so I'm a senior threat analyst here at Sumo Logic with the SpecOps group. James Plager, who is the manager of our team, will be joining shortly, and he'll be able to moderate sort of the chat and make sure that we can get you guys answers to the questions that you're asking. So what I'm going to talk about today is sort of the 4 Windows event IDs to rule them all. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and take a guess and put it into chat which 4 those are. The reason for this is a lot of companies want to focus on, threat hunting areas where it looks awesome, or it's something sexy, or it's something that like, oh my God, we've got to do this. But a lot of companies and a lot of individuals don't take the time to understand what they have. And this is something that we run into all the time. We'll work with a company and they've got the latest, greatest everything. But when it comes to the most basic rudimentary things, when it comes to logging, they don't have the necessary logs in place to even support any type of incident if it were to occur. Oops. So what we'll do is we'll talk through a few slides and then we'll go into Sumo Logic's Cloud SIEM Enterprise. The continuous intelligence platform, and we'll be doing our hunting within there.
Stop dragging that.
All right. So why Windows? To me, this is a really important question. It's something that we get a ton, and it really depends on the type of company that you're looking at. But to me, the most important thing when you think about threat hunting is that successful threat hunting relies on ground truth from actual log sources. It doesn't matter what your appliance says. If you don't have the logging in place, you're never going to understand what's actually occurring in the environment. So when we talk about Windows logging, obviously this is definitely one of the most prevalent OSs probably in the world. The majority of corporations, customers, and people that we work with, almost all have Windows OS. So when we think about that, we know that, all right, there's already default logging enabled. You can think about like your logons, your logoffs, account creation, lockouts, etc. All of that stuff is there. The problem is that most companies just let that go, and they think that that's fine. And when you start wanting to really dig into events and try to come up with some areas where you can look for like threat actors or look for IOCs, that logging may not be in place. So this is where I want to take the focus today, is to talk more about sort of the advanced audit policy and 4 of the Windows event IDs that will give us more of sort of like that almost EDR feel. And for these today, we're just going to talk about 4688. So that's your process creation. The key here is you must have command line logging enabled. So that's a secondary step that needs to occur. We'll talk about 4698. Scheduled task creation, 4697, service creation, and obviously 4104, which is PowerShell script block logging. So this is another question that immediately comes up when I try to discuss this with an existing customer. They'll say, well, we've got CrowdStrike, or we've got Carbon Black, or whatever, other product is out there. That's awesome. Those things are great. They do amazing jobs. But the problem comes down to, if you've ever been in an IR engagement, or you've had, some type of activity occur in your environment, you're going to need the actual ground truth. You're going to need the logs in place to verify the activity that's occurred within your environment. You're not going to do all of your forensics, all of your incident response, and everything in CrowdStrike. I don't care who you are. It does not work. You actually need the logs there in place. The other key with this too is they can be bypassed super easily. If you look at any of the new red team tactics that are out there, or what they're doing, there's so many ways to get around the rule sets that these EDRs have in place that it's kind of like mind-boggling. Like, I couldn't believe half the tooling that's out there now that just does this. It's extremely easy just to list the services that are running on a system once you have access and immediately see that these are running in that environment. There's ways to unhook these. There's rule sets published that you can just make sure that all of your techniques do not get triggered in those. And then the other piece of this is tuning. There's so many people that just, they don't care. So they plug it in, forget it, and they're like, that's fine. Everything works. You know, we're getting alerts. That's what it's supposed to do. That's not what it's supposed to do. You need to dig into these appliances. You need to ensure that you're doing triage and that these alerts that are firing are actually alerts that you want to see. You need to verify that you actually have people that monitor them. And you need to make sure that these are tuned to fit your particular environment. Once they come out of the box, this is not a one size fits all for every corporation. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Okay, so this is the secondary follow-up to that I'm asked all the time. Let's just throw Sysmon on. It's awesome. Everyone talks about it. It's all the rage. Everyone's doing presentations on it. No. This is one of those operating, or it's not an operating, this is another logging source that you need to have within your environment once you reach a certain maturity, is probably the best way to put it. Sysmon is excellent at covering gaps that Windows traditional logging does not have, that your EDR does not have. But to get to that place, you need to ensure that you've already enabled the Windows logging that you have, you're utilizing it, and you already have your appliances tuned and ready to go. The other piece to this is the configuration to Sysmon is ridiculous. If you really want to tune this and you really want to ensure that you're not going to be getting thousands and thousands and thousands, maybe even millions of event logs, you need to go through your environment, audit it, baseline it, and put those exceptions into the configuration. And I've seen really, really well orchestrated environments that have configurations that are well over 10,000 lines. That takes months to do. This isn't something you can just do, you know, quickly overnight. The other piece to this too is everyone is super in on Swift on security. They're like, oh, his configuration's money. We'll just go with that. He knows what he's doing. That's risky. You know, for a while there, he hadn't touched his configuration in over a year, and there were multiple typos within there, misspellings, wrong things. And how do you know that that configuration that he has is tailored to your environment? It's just one of those, it's just one of the things that I think that once you have the basics down and your logging is established, this is something that you can then utilize to kind of fill in the gaps within your environment. Again, this is kind of like EDR. It's super easy to bypass this. There's a lot of ways around this. The upside to this, though, is Sysmon Event ID 1, which would be your process creation, is equivalent to Windows 4688, which is process creation as well. The key to this, though, is Sysmon includes hashes. There's a lot of detection logic that you can utilize within your environment, including, you know, hunting with IOCs, where those hashes become extremely important. So this is one that I would love more environments and, you know, more customers to utilize, but it does take a lot of time to get configured appropriately. And you're talking very large log volumes for this.
Hey, Brian, can you promote? Okay, cool. James is here as co-host to help manage the attendees. Thanks. I didn't mean to interrupt, but we definitely wanted someone in to help you out.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start with what I would like to call probably the greatest event ID of all time. So this would be 4688. This is Windows process creation. So you can hunt in any environment that has this available with the command line logging for probably the rest of your life, and you'll still find interesting stuff. I don't care like how experienced you are. If you're, you know, 1 year into security, if you've been hunting for like 1 month, or if you've been hunting for, you know, 2-3 decades, this is the event ID that rules them all. There is no adversary that I am aware of that cannot go into a Windows environment without using the command line in some form. So what does that mean? So perhaps that you miss, you know, the entry or how they got in. they're still going to have to utilize something within the environment that's going to give them up. And it's going to be via the command line. If you're logging this, you have that information in your environment. Yes, it's a voluminous, but there's a lot of ways to carve this up. There's a lot of ways to look at this data. So here's just sort of a summary of what this entails. It just gives you, the program that is executed, who the program ran as, the process that started the process launch path, and these logs go into your Windows security log. The bottom piece there, this is the critical piece. A lot of people will just enable this via GPO and skip this. And this is really the reason this log is so valuable, is the actual command line process auditing. This is a secondary step in the GPO that you have to enable. And this is what gives this event ID the value. Okay, so first up, I really wanted to bring these up because there's so much going on in research with this currently. If you follow like Twitter, there's a couple of accounts that are out there, like Hexacorn's one. There's a few others that constantly are finding these or are getting these reported to them, and they're, either adding them to this LOLBAS project, or there's a couple of other websites where they're kind of gathered. So this is like really interesting work. To me, when you think of this, a lot of people will say, oh, it's fileless attacks. It's not necessarily fileless for the most part. You still sometimes need files on the system to utilize these. But the key to getting one of these into the project is, one, it's got to be a signed file. So this is a Microsoft binary script, something of that nature. It has to have unexpected behavior, or it can bypass application whitelisting. The other key to this, which I hate that they say, but I mean, it's useful for an APT or a red team, of course. They use these all the time. And there's about 135 of these that fit into this category, which is just astronomically scary if you think about it. So these are essentially like the living off the land binary and scripts. They're Windows applications that are on your systems throughout your entire environment that have unexpected behavior that can occur with them. Meaning, some of these can download files, some of them can hide. Some of them can hide behavior that the adversary might not want you to see. This is gold for hunting. Like it's just, that's what it is. If you want to start somewhere, if you're like just a SOC level 1 analyst or just beginning to get into hunting, go to this GitHub page, start looking through these. As long as you have 4688 with command line logging enabled, you can just go through one by one and start auditing everything within your environment with these. You will find so much interesting stuff within your environment. I can't guarantee it's all going to be bad, but you will get a very good understanding as to how a lot of applications work, including legitimate applications, which probably shouldn't be doing some of these techniques to begin with. So let's go to the first one of these. So I'm just going to call out two in this because there's so many. So the first one, regserve 32. Obviously, Windows signed binary, that's what it has to be. So this one's a command line utility. You can register and unregister DLLs and ActiveX controls in the registry. You can create persistence via COM objects, via scripts in the registry. The script location can be local or remote. Techniques to avoid application whitelisting. This one essentially does it all. The technique that's shown here at the bottom, calling the backdoor with the scrobj DLL. So this is old school. This was like, I think found in like 2015 or 16. It's still valid. So this was called the squibbly do attack. Essentially, it just allows a user to call register 32 past the location. So the location is generally remote. Pull down the scriptlet file, it registers the COM object, and boom, they have persistence. So if we want to take a look at this and see what we can find within the actual environment, let's see. We sign in. All right. So for this one, this is super simple. I'm not doing any sort of wizardry. Like this is very basic syntax that you can utilize. We are just looking through our endpoint records, looking for 4688. We're looking for the command line, and we're looking for regserve32. I'm just going to run this for a couple of days. So this is pretty much our SpecOps analysis lab. So this is populated with all sorts of horrible things, and where we pretty much test a lot of the detections that we are working on. So we can immediately see we've got the command line. It's being paged out here. So we have our connection, and I just made this up so it looks extremely easy to see. C2, obviously, it's got a script and it's calling our DLL. To make this like more interesting, one of the customers I had a long time ago, we were hunting in their environment for this specific thing, and we found it. And it was interesting because it was a scheduled task that was calling this every single day, every hour, and it was calling out to a Russian IP that was a known Andromeda IP. And it had been doing this since 2017. And I found this in their environment in 2020. And this came about because I had asked them to start, auditing 4688 with command line logging. They had not had that in their environment. And once they did, all sorts of stuff started popping up. So this is one of those things where, yeah, this technique is old. It may not be like the newest thing that's out there, but it's still worth taking a look at. It's something that you're still going to find stuff with. There's legitimate applications that pull this all the time. It's still worth taking a look at. All right, so let's go back to slides. And we'll go to the next one. So this is another one. We're just going to cover two. So this is mshta. This one's used a lot as well. Again, another signed binary. This is used by Windows to execute HTML applications or .htas. So these are the only two places this should run from. This is another key when you talk about 4688, because it has the process and the parent process, and you can see the location of those. That's another hunt job that you could easily do is, is this executing from an unknown path? Is LSAS in an unknown path? Is CRSS in an unknown path? Is WinInit? Really basic stuff that you can hunt with unknown or not their traditional launch path. This in particular can execute just about all the scripts, like VB, JavaScript, JScript, and it also can execute code in ADS. This is another one that we found within environments. So you're going to see it's going to call out to whatever web server, and it's going to pull down an HTA file. So it'll open that HTA file, execute the embedded code, and you do not need to be an admin to do this. Any regular user can do this, which is why these are so prevalent in environments. So we can take a look at this one too. And let's see. Swear I'm human. I make mistakes in here all the time. So this is another one that we found, and I was running a pretty much atomic red team in our lab for most of yesterday, trying to generate just a bunch of content. This one's calling out to GitHub, and it's pulling down their their SCT file and executing that within the system. Again, this is another thing that you can utilize once you start logging these within your environment. It's extremely useful to install this. So Atomic Red Team will allow you to test all of the MITRE attack techniques. You just call up the technique that you're interested in and say you want like mshta. You can just do like what I think it's like 1053 might be the technique number, something like that. And it will execute this in an environment. And then you can see if either your logic is firing on this or if you're able to detect this by looking through the logs. There's a bunch of ways to test that within the environment. All right, so let's go to this. Okay, So we talked about that. Obviously, this is another big one. I call this catching slackers because that's exactly what they are. These are the guys that either are like first time red teaming or just don't care, or like script kiddies, like they have no real interest. They don't rename anything. They just pull it down into your environment. And it's as simple as just typing in like Mimikatz. If you have the logs in and if it matches, then you're generally good to go, and take a look at that. So obviously we've got Mimikatz here. The credential easy button gives you lateral movement. There's tons of different variations to this. There's tons of things you can do to look for this. Red teams love it. Adversaries love it. This is the same sort of thing as if you think about just malicious tools in general. They've got to be brought or retrieved. Yes, the LOLBins that are within your environment are going to help them do what they need to do, but a lot of times it's not enough. They're going to have to pull something down from somewhere to figure out their end goal. And generally it's going to be probably Mimikatz or some form of imp packet or something that's going to get them credentials within your environment. This could be like bloodhounds. This could be a lot of things. They've got to be configured. They've got to be utilized. And how do they do that? They do that via the command line. That means if you have 4688 enabled with command line logging, you're going to see this activity. It's just the nature of it. Like you've got to have that enabled in your environment. So let's take a look at another one. So this one is just looking at the command line. We're just looking for invoke or calling dump creds or calling dump certs. There's a lot of different things that you can look at via the command line for this. There's tons of stuff. So you can see right here, here's another one, run32.dll, another LOLBin, pulling down from GitHub, PowerShell Mafia, PowerSploit, invoke Mimikatz. I cannot stress this enough. There are many times in many environments where the adversary is not changing this name, not hiding this. A great hunt job is to just look at all the callouts to GitHub in your environment. If you see any of these, you can easily take a look and see the applications that are being downloaded from there. It's very straightforward to find out if it's good or bad. It's definitely another win. Another thing that we can actually search for as well is just to keep it ridiculously simple, just type in the name. Like, even if you don't know how to do the regex for it, or you're not, extremely proficient with the query language, you can type in Bloodhound. As long as you have, the event ID that you're looking for and you've got the logging enabled, you can see it immediately. So we've got IAX, it's downloading the string, it's putting it into memory. So this is via PowerShell with SharpPanda. So this is another one. Adversaries use this nonstop. The blue team needs to start using this as well. You can discover your attack paths. You can map out the same thing the adversary is going to do within your environment, and you can change that. You can make sure that they're not going to be able to get those paths to domain admin as easily. I'm highly for running these types of tools within production environments. That way you can ensure that you are doing the exact same thing that a red team operator is going to do, or the adversary is going to do within your environment. This way you can also test your logging, you can test your alerts, you can make sure that your EDR and all those other things are working, and you're able to detect all of this. All right, so let's go back to the slides. Okay, so this one is just pure fun. When you have 4688 enabled, and I don't know why more people don't do this, it's simply just looking for short exe names. You're just looking for those processes that don't make sense. Like, why would somebody name something 1.exe or 1234? No one should be doing that. It has no value. It doesn't tell you what it is. It's not descriptive. If we look at these IOCs here, these are some from when the FBI released them for DarkSide a while ago. You can see this is just a chunk of them. There was way more than this, but all of those exe names, no one in your environment should be naming this. If you're a dev, do not name something 1.exe. This should never occur. This is really simple to look for, and it provides a ton of value. This is something that you can go through your environment, and trust me, in an enterprise environment, it's going to take a while. You're going to probably have a ton of whitelisting to do, but you will be able to find some extremely interesting cases. You're going to find like a lot of malware, a lot of like pup spyware, that kind of stuff all operates on this same premise. So let's take a look at these as well. All right, so super simple regex. We're just looking for 1 to 5 with an exe. We're counting by the base image. Again, don't really care too much about the high count. When you do this within your environment, that can become your baseline. You know, if you've got 1,000 endpoint systems and you have 1,000 of engine.exe, that probably is an application within your environment that you need. So you can whitelist that out. What we want to know is we want to go to the lowest ones, the ones where there's not that many. So you can see here, we've got curl.exe, mshta, which is what we looked at. There's DNS, VDS, rar.exe. All of these are worthwhile. All of these I would dig into a lot more and see why there's only one occurrence of them, what they are, where they came from, who downloaded it. There's a lot that you can do with this. I think this is a super easy search for any environment. As long as you have the correct logging in place, there's a ton of upside to searching this. Okay, so now we're going to talk about 4698, and this is probably the most underwhelming event ID that almost no one ever has logged in their environment. I don't know why. So this is scheduled task creation. So it obviously logs when new scheduled tasks are created. It gives you the account name, so who created it, the logon ID, so you can correlate that to a 4624, which is a Windows logon event, so you know who logged on to that session. Also logs to the security log. And this is probably the most common persistence mechanisms used by red teams and adversaries. I just don't know why people don't log this. It's something that you should definitely take a look at within your environment. So if we want like a real world example of this, so this is SharpPanda, believed to be a Chinese group. Most recently targeted the Asian government, their Southeast Asian government. They utilize spear phishing with an RTF file. They were using the equation editor vulnerability. And of course, their scheduled task was their persistence mechanism was a scheduled task called Windows Update that loaded Cobalt Strike via the LOLBin we just talked about, register 32. This is from Checkpoint. So if you don't believe me, you can just simply go to MITRE, take a look at the technique. This was just a section of probably over 100 actors that utilize scheduled tasks for persistence. Also including just about every ransomware gang you can think of utilizes this technique. So it is definitely worth making sure that you have this logging enabled and that you are taking a look at these. So this is a snapshot from one of the Windows machines that I have. It depends on the environment for these a lot of the times. You can have an environment where, you know, there aren't very many scheduled tasks in the environment like this, where there's like 15, you can easily take a look at these and say like, oh, these are fine. There's not a lot going on. I've been in environments where there's hundreds on a machine and I have no clue why. And you've really got to dig through each one. This is one of those times where you really kind of want to have a baseline, or start hunting through these, start writing down the ones that you know that all systems have that are legitimate. Eventually you'll build your baseline that way. It might take a little bit more time, but you'll get to that point. This is definitely worth doing. There's just so much persistence that occurs within this that you should be looking at these regardless. So persistence, creating a baseline. So you're doing routine auditing of scheduled tasks. We talked about that already. So these are undetected most of the time because most people do not do advanced audit policy to enable this. Significant volume, talked about that. Difficulty separating good from bad, it takes time. You'll get it eventually. Leveraged heavily by ransomware groups. And for an example here, these are the ones that Maze uses within Windows environments. Windows Update Security, Windows Update Security patches, Google Chrome. If you're not looking for these, you're definitely going to be missing a ton of stuff. So let's just take a quick look at these. All right. And did it again. Okay. Again, like we just had mentioned previously, this is how you're going to start to build your baseline. You're going to start looking at the task name. You're going to start looking at the count, base it on the number of systems within your environment. If it's legit, you can just simply add an exclusion to this and keep working down the list until you have them all in there. So I created a whole bunch. These are super easy to create. So we've got Windows updates, Evil, Chrome, Windows, Reverse Shell. There's so many of these that you can take a look at. It's just one of those things that I don't think most people realize it, but like it's a very important event ID that should be logged. It should be audited. Have an analyst start taking a look at these. All right. So we're going to move on to 4697. And this is service creation. So this is another really important one that flies sort of under the radar as well. So it shows when a new service was installed on the system, and it was in Windows 10 and 2016 and newer. Previously to that, this was event ID 7045. And the reason I bring this one up to people is because they're like, oh, that's been logged forever. That's true. It was logged as event ID 7045, but it was in the systems log. The problem with that is if you talk to any analyst, how often do they go into the systems log? Just about never. When you're talking about any kind of incident or hunting, or you're looking for threats to your environment, they're in the security log. That's why this one to me is important to make sure that it's enabled in your environment, because now once you enable this, these do then flow into the security log and you have that single view. You can just go there, find everything that you need to, and not have to worry about it. Again, this gives you account name, who created it. This gives you the domain or the computer if it was logged on locally. And you can correlate it to 4624 for session info as well. So another recent example, APT 41, threat group suspected to operate on behalf of China. So these were the guys scanning the internet with all sorts of vulnerabilities for Citrix and all types of things. They were utilizing bits admin to download install.bat, which leveraged sc.exe to install Cobalt Strike. This one is super interesting. This is another thing that you can audit within your environment, sc.exe. Not many people should be creating services via the command line. It's another thing that you can definitely take a look at. So again, MITRE attack, there's a bunch within here. So service creation can fall under persistence or it can fall under execution. It just depends on the way that it's utilized within the environment. There's a ton within here. These again are super useful to take a look at. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to look at remote service creation. Would this be expected within your environment? Should applications be doing this? What about employees? These are all questions you should ask yourself, and all of these questions are probably going to occur within separate hunts within your environment. So the first one here with sc.exe, this is remote, so it's just going to be whatever target host, so it could be IP, host name, etc. You're going to create, and then evil service is the name of the service that you're actually going to create, and bin path is the path to that actual executable. that you want that to become. Below that is WMI, another one that falls under the radar all the time. These ones are interesting to find as well. WMI is probably best found via 4688 and the command line, as opposed to straight looking at 4697 logs. It's just, you're not going to see it as well. So let's look at these and go with. Okay. So we've got a bunch of services. This, again, is the way that you would probably want to go about baselining these within your environment. Obviously, go to the lowest. So you can see immediately like a bunch of these stick out. So we've got evil WMI, evil PsExec, evil service. We've got Windows with a 1, SVC host with a 0. This is the kind of stuff that you're looking for. You're looking for typos, odd names, duplicative tasks that shouldn't have to, that kind of stuff within your environment. And then for WMI, so we do see that service name there, but we don't know that it was actually created via WMI. You really have to go to the command line for this. It's just pretty much the only way you're going to actually realize that WMI created this. So you can see via the command line here, we've got service call create. And that's the key to looking at these. When you start figuring out how these can actually be created within your environment, there's very certain patterns that are going to occur. For WMI to create a service, it has to utilize service call create. That will be utilized by Windows. You will see this stuff occur within a Windows enterprise, but it's also something that you should monitor because that's exactly how an adversary is going to have to do it within the same environment. All right, so let's go to PsExec. So this is interesting because when I first started in IT, this was the tool that everyone utilized. As a sysadmin, it was super easy. It was awesome. It worked really well. Now, PowerShell should have replaced this. And in some environments that I look at, it has. In others, it hasn't. The weird thing with this is if you did replace this with PowerShell, you would immediately be guaranteed to know if something was occurring within your environment because no one should be using PsExec. The problem is, though, if you're a split system where you're using both, you really have to look into what's utilizing PsExec. This is definitely utilized by lots of actors out there. The keys to this is, it copies itself via SMB. It creates its service on the target host. But once the task is done, it cleans up everything. And it can definitely be renamed easily. This has been repackaged so many times, it's not even funny. But it's something that you can definitely look for on here. So let's do that.
Comment while you're looking, Brian?
Yeah.
One thing that we recommend with our customers, if you're using a legacy and kind of rare tool like PsExec in your environment still, it makes sense to basically assign static IP addresses to those admin workstations where that's used. And then you can basically exclude those from alerting and baseline your environment. And then any other use outside of that of PsExec is going to most likely be adversary usage.
Okay, so the first one here is we are going to look at, again, 4688 and make sure that we're seeing this. So we are seeing via the command line, SC, create, obviously the evil service that's occurring within there. There's a bunch of different ways to look at this within your environment. So here's another one. So this one, we're actually looking through the service creation logs. And we're looking for the service that it creates. And we're seeing that right here. So when you run PsExec, remember it's copying this over and naming the service. One way to do that Sometimes if an adversary screws up, they'll rename the exe when they download it, but they won't rename this part within it. So it may not be the same name, or it might be. It just depends on how good they are with that. Another way to detect this, if you don't have these logs, and you have networking within your environment, is you can pull it this way as well too, because remember, it's over SMB. So we're just looking for a read here. You can look for a write. It just depends on the action, but you're going to see the file name PsExec service. So you'll see that there. So if you don't have these logs, and say you have Bro or another networking monitor within your environment, there's definitely ways to take a look at this. Just depends how you want to do it. I still recommend having the base Windows logs enabled for this. It just makes it a lot easier. And then also what Darren had mentioned, you can obviously put these admin IPs in and whitelist that out. And then that way the content that you have will be able to find, new instances of this occurring. Okay, so let's move on to PowerShell, the best of them all. This is so much fun. PowerShell script block logging, 4104. Obviously, there's 2 of NID. Well, there's 5 that get enabled if you enable PowerShell logging. A lot of people talk about 4103, which is module logging. It's cool. I don't mind it. But if you're talking about volumes and you can only have one, 4104 is the one to have within your environment. The reason for that, it captures the full command or contents of the script, whereas module logging isn't going to do that. There's limits to how many lines it can hold, so you might not get the entire script. And if you look at something like a PowerShell Empire Stager, it's massive. So you will never get all of the code within that within a 4103 event ID. Other keys to this you're going to get is who executed the script, when the script occurred. And pretty much the awesome part is, regardless of how PowerShell was executed, it ends up here. It also attempts to deobfuscate the script block. It works on occasion. I'm not going to say it's the end all be all. It'll sometimes help you, sometimes it won't. Just pivot to CyberChef, or you may have to just debug it yourself. This one does not go to the Windows security logs. This one instead goes to your PowerShell operational logs. So another group, Wizard Spider, believed to be the primary operators of RIAC. So reading the DFIR report, which is awesome. Everyone should be checking that out. In theory, they believe they went from email to full-on domain ransomware in 29 hours, which is crazy scary. They leverage Cobalt Strike, AD Fund, WMI, PowerShell, all the stuff. Their claim to fame with this was they utilized PowerShell to disable Windows Defender, which is surprisingly very easy to do. I didn't believe this, and I ran it in our lab, and I was like, wow, it worked. So definitely something to look for. So let's take a look at, let's see. We'll talk about this first, and then we'll dig into a little bit more. This is probably one of the biggest problems that I see when people start looking at PowerShell and start threat hunting, is the amount of obfuscation and aliases that it contains are mind-boggling. I mean, you can call invoke expression as invoke expression, IEX, IEX, lowercase. There's Windows style, there's no profile, command, execution policy. There's so many ways to obfuscate this. Obviously, Daniel Bohannon did a wonderful job doing this at Mandiant. Definitely go check out his talk. Check out invoke obfuscation. It's insane. It's a very good way to test logic that you're using for this type of stuff. Okay. So one of the cool things I did find when I was working within PowerShell to sort of help with all of this is you don't always know, the aliases that are tied to something. Like you might know, oh, there's like one or two. PowerShell helps a little bit, Granted, these I can guarantee you are not all of them. There's probably way more, but at least it gives you a chunk of them. So if you are in your PowerShell CLI and you type get-help, and then what you're interested in, like invoke-web request. At the bottom here, you can see aliases. So it tells you IWR, wget, and curl. So if you are doing logic on invoke web request, you better include those other three. I don't know how many more there are or how many different other ways you can possibly obfuscate this, but it's a good start. It's something that everyone should know and everyone should be looking into. The other piece here too, this is just awesome fun, but the problem is you can make anything an alias that you want. So I can say set alias web for invoke web request. Now invoke web request is working with web. The cool thing with this though is once you log out, it's gone. That alias gets blown away. The problem is if you're not logging this type of stuff and the adversary is persistent for a very long time within your environment, that alias is still good. So it's just something to keep in mind when you start looking into this a lot more. There's a lot of obfuscation and aliases that can be involved with this. And then the fun, the best part of PowerShell, it can load into memory. This is primarily where the term fileless for fileless malware comes from. It's super easy to bypass AV, EDR, all that type of stuff. If you're not auditing, you're not going to see this. Obviously, like CrowdStrike and some of the EDRs that are out there pick up methods of this. They don't pick up everything, as does, most things aren't going to catch all of this occurring. But this is essentially your typical command. You're calling a bypass, no profile, no exit, and you're invoking whatever is getting downloaded from this string right into memory. So there will be no file on your system with this. So let's take a look. First, let's look at using some of the aliases and see what we get. So this is pretty much what we're going to see in a lot of environments. Depending on how you have PowerShell set up and depending on tools that are used within your environment, if you're searching just like ENC or just encoded, you can see all sorts of things that utilize this. I know like Landesk, think Chocolatey, a bunch of those tools encode everything. I have no idea why, but it's encoded in your environment. You will see a lot of false positives. But this is more along the lines of what we're looking for. So you're looking for like your base 64, something that you can easily decode, a blob. It doesn't really look good, but it's worth the obfuscating or it's worth checking out to see, what's occurring with that. Is that legitimate? Is that something that shouldn't be occurring within the environment? So if we look at download, which is, we're just doing term searching here. It's super easy. That same blob that we just looked at is this. Why? Because it was base 64 and 4104 event IDs can deobfuscate some things, not everything. So we can actually see the invoke expression calling net web client to download. Obviously, this was from Atomic Red Team, so it's local to the system, and then setting this up. And what this is how to disable Defender, which is what we just saw from those adversaries that were utilizing it. It's an interesting technique. It does work. If you have the code that you need and host it, it'll definitely work within your environment. Okay, let's go back. So that sort of wraps up what I had wanted to cover today. These are some of the services that SpecOps provides: managed threat hunting, defensive program support consultation, use case development, detection engineering, and event review.